Life is filled with wounds, betrayals, and experiences that leave deep marks on the soul. Yet Carl Jung reminds us that true freedom does not come from avoiding pain, but from transforming our relationship with it. In this lecture, Nothing and Nobody Will Ever Hurt You Again, Carl Jung, we will explore the profound ways in which self-awareness, shadow integration, and individuation create an inner strength that no external force can shatter. Jung teaches that when you reclaim your projections, when you face the unconscious rather than run from it, you step into a wholeness that protects you from being defined by others' actions. Pain may still touch your life, but it will not dominate you. Silence self-focus and inner balance create a shield of authenticity where nothing and nobody has the power to wound the core of your being again. The role of individuation in building inner strength that cannot be broken is central to Carl Jung's vision of the human psyche. Individuation is not simply a process of self-improvement or adopting new habits. It is the deep psychological journey of becoming whole, of integrating all parts of oneself into a coherent center guided by the self. In a world where people are often shaped by external expectations, wounded by rejection, or disoriented by failure, individuation provides the foundation for a resilience that does not depend on circumstances. When a person undergoes individuation, they are no longer defined solely by the persona, the mask worn to please society, nor are they enslaved by unconscious complexes that hijack their lives. Instead, they become anchored in the self, the central archetype of wholeness, which offers stability, strength, and guidance. This anchoring allows the individual to meet life's challenges without collapsing under their weight, because their sense of identity is no longer fragile or dependent on external validation. At the heart of individuation is the integration of the unconscious with the conscious mind. Most people live with large portions of their psyche hidden from them, pushed into the unconscious because they are uncomfortable, painful, or inconsistent with their self-image. These unconscious parts do not disappear. They continue to influence thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways that often cause suffering. By bringing these hidden parts into awareness, individuation dissolves their destructive power. For example, a person who represses anger may constantly find themselves at the mercy of others, unable to assert boundaries, leading to repeated feelings of hurt. Through individuation, they acknowledge this anger, understand its source, and integrate it as a natural part of themselves. Once integrated, it no longer erupts uncontrollably or leaves them vulnerable to harm, but instead becomes a healthy force for self-protection. This integration of shadow material is one of the main ways individuation builds unbreakable inner strength. Individuation also redefines the relationship between the ego and the self. The ego, with its need for recognition, approval, and control, is easily hurt by criticism, rejection, or failure. It is fragile because it depends on maintaining an image in the eyes of others. The self, however, represents a deeper and more expansive center of being that includes both conscious and unconscious aspects. When the ego is aligned with the self, its identity is no longer rooted solely in external validation. The individual begins to live from an inner authority, guided by symbols, dreams, and intuitions that arise from the unconscious. This alignment creates stability because it connects the person to something larger than their transient circumstances. Even when others criticize or betray them, the core remains intact because their worth is no longer determined from the outside. This is the essence of resilience, the capacity to withstand external blows without collapsing internally. And another dimension of individuation is the balancing of opposites within the psyche. Jung taught that wholeness requires embracing both sides of every polarity, the rational and the irrational, the masculine and the feminine, the light and the shadow. Many people suffer because they over-identify with one side and repress the other, leading to imbalance and vulnerability. For instance, someone who identifies only with rationality may repress intuition, leaving them disconnected from deeper guidance. Another who embraces only passivity may repress assertiveness, leaving them unable to defend themselves. Individuation restores balance by integrating these opposites, creating inner harmony that allows the individual to draw upon the full spectrum of their capacities. This balance strengthens them because they are no longer one-sided and fragile, but whole and adaptable. When life presents challenges, they can respond with a wider range of resources, making them resilient in the face of adversity. Individuation also transforms the relationship with suffering. Jung believed that suffering is not meaningless, but can serve as a catalyst for growth if approached consciously. Those who avoid or deny their suffering remain trapped by it, repeating cycles of pain. Those who engage with it through individuation discover that within suffering lies wisdom and transformation. By facing pain rather than fleeing it, individuals integrate it into their story, discovering strength they did not know they possessed. This transformation turns wounds into sources of resilience, because once a person has faced their deepest pain and survived, they no longer fear being destroyed by life's difficulties. They carry within them the knowledge that they can endure. And this knowledge forms an unshakable core. Dreams and symbols also play a vital role in individuation and in building strength. Jung emphasized that the unconscious communicates through symbolic imagery, which often carries messages about areas of imbalance or hidden potential. By paying attention to dreams, fantasies, and synchronicities, individuals gain insight into their inner world and guidance for their journey. This dialogue with the unconscious builds strength because it connects the individual with a source of wisdom beyond the ego. They are no longer navigating life blindly, but are in communication with a deeper intelligence that supports their growth. This connection fosters trust in the psyche's capacity for self-regulation, making them less vulnerable to despair when challenges arise. The unconscious becomes an ally rather than an enemy, and this alliance creates confidence that nothing external can easily shake. Individuation also reduces dependence on projections, which are a major source of hurt in human relationships. People often project their unacknowledged qualities onto others, idealizing or demonizing them, and then feel wounded when these projections fail. For example, someone may project their inner sense of worth onto a partner, expecting them to provide constant validation. When the partner inevitably fails, to meet this unrealistic demand, the individual feels rejected or betrayed. Through individuation, these projections are reclaimed. The person realizes that what they sought in others actually resides within themselves. They begin to own their worth, their strength and their potential, rather than outsourcing it to others. This reclamation of projections builds resilience because the individual is no longer devastated when others disappoint them. They stand on their own foundation, secure in their own value. Another strength of individuation lies in its connection to archetypes, the universal patterns of the collective unconscious. Archetypes such as the hero, the wise old man, the mother, or the warrior provide symbolic resources that individuals can draw upon in their own lives. When facing challenges, a person who has engaged in individuation may find strength in identifying with these archetypal energies. They recognize that they are not alone in their struggles, but are participating in patterns that humanity has lived through across time. This recognition expands their perspective, allowing them to endure hardship with greater courage. They feel connected to something larger than themselves, and this connection imbues their suffering with meaning. Meaning itself is one of the greatest sources of resilience, because pain with meaning is more bearable than pain that seems random or senseless. The process of individuation also cultivates authenticity, and authenticity is itself a form of protection. When you live inauthentically, constantly adjusting yourself to please others or to fit expectations, you become vulnerable to hurt, because your sense of self depends on external approval. Any criticism, rejection, or failure can feel like a threat to your very existence. But when you live authentically, rooted in your own truth, you are less shaken by others' opinions. You may still feel pain, but it does not reach your core, because your core is defined by your alignment with the self, not by the shifting judgments of the world. Authenticity makes you resilient because it grounds you in something that cannot be taken away. Individuation is also about establishing an ongoing dialogue between the conscious and unconscious, rather than being dominated by one or the other. Many people live dominated by the unconscious, swept away by emotions, impulses, or complexes they do not understand, as others over-identify with the conscious mind, rigidly controlling and suppressing the depths of the psyche. Both extremes create fragility. Individuation balances the two, creating a relationship in which the conscious mind listens to the unconscious and integrates its messages. This balance makes the psyche more flexible, less brittle. When external challenges arise, the individual can adapt because they are not rigidly identified with one part of themselves. This adaptability is a key form of inner strength, allowing them to bend without breaking. The role of individuation in building strength also extends to the realm of spirituality. Jung saw the self as not only a psychological construct, but also as pointing toward transcendent reality. Individuation often awakens spiritual experiences such as synchronicities, feelings of unity with nature, or encounters with symbolic figures in dreams. These experiences provide a sense of connection with something greater than the individual ego, which reduces fear and despair. When a person feels connected to the larger order of existence, They are less likely to be crushed by personal setbacks. They recognize their place in a larger story, and this recognition provides meaning and courage. Spiritual depth cultivated through individuation becomes a shield against the wounds of life. Ultimately, individuation creates a foundation of wholeness. A fragmented psyche is vulnerable because it is at war with itself and dependent on external conditions for stability. A whole psyche, by contrast, carries its stability within. The individual who has undergone individuation may still feel pain, disappointment, or loss, but these experiences do not destroy them, because their identity is not tied exclusively to external outcomes. Their sense of self is anchored in the self, which includes all aspects of their being and connects them to the larger reality of life. This wholeness builds a strength that cannot be broken, because it is not based on illusions, masks, or borrowed values, but on the truth of who they are. This is the gift of individuation, a resilience that endures, an inner fortress that protects without isolating, and a wholeness that allows life to fall into place, even in the face of adversity. Shadow integration is one of the most essential and transformative aspects of Carl Jung's psychology, and it is the key to transforming pain into resilience. The shadow contains all the parts of ourselves that we deny, repress, or disown because they do not fit the image we wish to present to the world. These elements can be qualities we label as negative: anger, jealousy, selfishness, aggression, but they can also include positive aspects such as ambition, confidence, or creativity that we suppressed out of fear of rejection, because the shadow is hidden from conscious awareness. It does not vanish. Instead, it influences our behavior indirectly, often in destructive ways. We may project it onto others, seeing in them what we cannot accept in ourselves, or we may be sabotaged by unconscious impulses that erupt when we least expect them. As long as the shadow remains unacknowledged, it is a source of suffering, creating pain, both within and in our relationships with others. Jung taught that only by confronting and integrating the shadow can we free ourselves from this suffering and build a resilience that cannot be shaken by external wounds. The first step in shadow integration is recognition. Most people resist acknowledging their shadow because it threatens their self-image. The persona, the social mask we wear, is designed to present us in a favorable light, but the shadow contradicts that image. It shows us that we are not as purely kind, rational, or virtuous as we would like to believe. This realization can be painful, but Jung emphasized that confronting the shadow is not about condemnation. It is about truth. By acknowledging the shadow, you begin to see yourself more completely, and this wholeness is the foundation of resilience. When you know the full range of who you are less easily destabilized by the criticisms or judgments of others. Painful as it may be to face, the truth of the shadow liberates you from the fragility of denial. Shadow integration also involves reclaiming the energy trapped in repressed qualities. When parts of ourselves are pushed into the unconscious, they do not disappear. They remain active but inaccessible, draining energy and causing inner conflict. For example, a person who represses their assertiveness may find themselves repeatedly exploited or unable to set boundaries. This creates pain and resentment that eats away at their sense of worth. By integrating this assertiveness, they reclaim the ability to protect themselves, transforming pain into strength. Similarly, someone who represses their vulnerability may appear strong, but secretly feel isolated and unable to form authentic relationships. By accepting vulnerability as part of themselves, they open the door to deeper connection and resilience in the face of loneliness. Each integration of shadow material releases energy that was once used to suppress it, and this energy becomes available for creativity, growth, and healing. Shadow work also transforms the way we experience suffering. Much of human pain arises not from experiences themselves, but from resistance to them. When we deny anger, it festers as depression. When we deny grief, it emerges as numbness. When we deny fear, it becomes anxiety. By integrating these emotions, we stop resisting them and allow them to move through us as natural expressions of the psyche. This does not eliminate pain, but it changes our relationship with it. Pain becomes a messenger rather than an enemy, guiding us toward what needs attention. This shift is profoundly empowering because it turns suffering into an opportunity for growth rather than a source of despair. Jung often emphasized that suffering was necessary for transformation, but only if it was approached consciously. Shadow integration is the path to conscious suffering, where pain is not denied, but embraced and thereby transformed into resilience. Another way shadow integration builds resilience is by reducing the power of projection. When we disown aspects of ourselves, we inevitably project them onto others. This creates conflict because we react strongly to qualities in others that actually belong to us. For instance, a person who represses their own selfishness may be hypersensitive to selfishness in others, constantly feeling wounded by perceived slights. By integrating their own selfishness, acknowledging that they too are capable of self-interest, they become less reactive. They no longer feel personally attacked when others act selfishly, because they have owned that quality within themselves. This reduces unnecessary suffering in relationships and strengthens the individual's ability to navigate conflict with clarity. The less we project, the less we are wounded by the behavior of others, because we no longer see our shadow reflected everywhere we look. Shadow integration also enhances authenticity, and authenticity itself is a shield against pain. When we live from a false self, constantly performing roles to meet expectations, we are vulnerable to rejection, because rejection of the role feels like rejection of our entire being. But when we integrate the shadow and live authentically, rejection loses much of its sting. Others may disagree with us or disapprove of us, but we remain grounded in the truth of who we are. This authenticity creates resilience because it anchors us in our own integrity rather than in external validation. Jung taught that wholeness was more important than goodness, and shadow integration is the process of embracing wholeness. To be whole is to be less easily hurt, because your sense of worth is no longer dependent on being seen as flawless or ideal. The integration of the shadow also fosters compassion, both for ourselves and for others. When we deny our shadow, we often judge others harshly for displaying the very qualities we disown. This judgment isolates us and creates conflict. But when we recognize that we too carry the potential for anger, selfishness, fear, or weakness, we become more understanding of others. This compassion does not excuse harmful behavior, but it allows us to respond without bitterness or hatred. Compassion is a form of resilience because it prevents the hardening of the heart. It allows us to face pain without being consumed by resentment, to acknowledge harm without becoming trapped in cycles of vengeance. By softening judgment, shadow integration opens the possibility of forgiveness, not as denial of pain, but as release from it. Shadow integration also prepares us for the archetypal trials of life. Jung believed that the human psyche was shaped by archetypal patterns, universal themes that repeat across cultures and histories. The shadow is one such archetype, and confronting it is a central theme in myths, stories, and religious traditions. Heroes often encounter dark figures or descend into underworlds that symbolize the shadow. By facing these trials, they emerge stronger, wiser, and more whole. This archetypal pattern reflects the psychological truth that resilience is born from confrontation with the shadow. Each time we face a hidden part of ourselves, we enact this archetypal journey, and each time we emerge with greater strength. Shadow integration thus connects us with a larger story of human growth, reminding us that our struggles are not unique, but part of a universal process of transformation. The practice of shadow integration requires courage because it demands looking honestly at what we fear or dislike about ourselves. Yet this courage is precisely what builds resilience. Every time we face the shadow and survive the confrontation, we prove to ourselves that we are stronger than we believed. This self-trust becomes a foundation of resilience because it reassures us that we can handle whatever arises. Life may still bring pain, but we no longer fear being destroyed by it because we have faced destruction within ourselves and emerged whole. This is why Jung saw shadow integration as not just a therapeutic tool, but as a spiritual discipline, a path toward becoming the person we were meant to be. Resilience born of shadow integration is not about invulnerability in the sense of never feeling hurt. It is about the capacity to feel deeply without being broken by what we feel. When the shadow is integrated, we can acknowledge anger without being consumed by it, sadness without being paralyzed by it, fear without being enslaved by it. This balanced relationship with our emotions makes us unshakable, not because we are numb, but because we are whole. We are no longer fragmented by repression or denial, but unified in a way that allows us to meet life as it comes. Jung believed that wholeness was the true goal of human development, and resilience is the natural result of wholeness. Shadow integration also enhances creativity, which is another form of resilience. When repressed material is integrated, it often releases itself through creative expression. Art, music, writing, and other forms of creativity become outlets for the energy that was once bound in the shadow. This creativity transforms pain into beauty, giving meaning to suffering and allowing us to share our journey with others. Creativity is resilient because it turns wounds into gifts, transforming what could have been destructive into something that enriches both ourselves and the collective. Jung himself used art and writing as a way to engage with his unconscious, and he encouraged others to do the same. By integrating the shadow creatively, we not only heal ourselves, but contribute to the healing of the world. The freedom that comes from shadow integration is profound. When the shadow is unacknowledged, we live in fear of exposure, afraid that others will see the parts of us we have hidden. This fear makes us vulnerable to manipulation and easily wounded by criticism. But when we integrate the shadow, we lose this fear because we have already faced what was hidden. Nothing others say about us can devastate us because we know ourselves fully, both light and dark. This freedom is resilience in its purest form because it makes us immune to the power of shame. We can still feel pain, but it no longer controls us. We can still be criticized, but it does not destroy our sense of worth. Shadow integration gives us back our power, making us whole, authentic, and unbreakable at the core. Detaching from projections and reclaiming personal power is one of the most transformative aspects of Carl Jung's psychology, because so much of human suffering comes from living under the spell of projections we cast onto others without realizing it. A projection is what happens when we take qualities, desires, fears, or wounds within ourselves that we cannot fully face and unconsciously attribute them to someone else. Instead of recognizing these elements as our own, we see them as existing in the people around us. And then we react to those people with powerful emotions that may seem justified, but are often misplaced. This process creates endless cycles of pain and confusion. We feel betrayed when others fail to embody the qualities we projected onto them. We feel attacked when others reflect back aspects of ourselves we do not want to acknowledge. And we lose touch with our true nature because we are living through distorted mirrors. Jung taught that detaching from these projections is essential for reclaiming personal power, because until we withdraw them, we remain controlled by illusions about others and blind to the truth about ourselves. The mechanism of projection begins in childhood, when parts of the psyche are split off and repressed because they are unacceptable to our caregivers, culture, or sense of self. A child who is told not to express anger may push anger into the unconscious, where it becomes part of the shadow. Later in life, that same person may see others as aggressive, hostile, or domineering, even when the reality is more complex. They react strongly to this perceived aggression, not realizing that it is their own denied anger being mirrored back at them. The projection creates unnecessary suffering, damaging relationships and preventing authentic connection. This same mechanism applies to positive qualities as well. Someone who represses their ambition may project it onto another person, idolizing them as powerful or successful, while failing to recognize that they themselves possess that potential. In both cases, the individual is cut off from their own wholeness and becomes vulnerable to hurt. Detaching from projections requires the courage to take back what has been cast onto others and to integrate it consciously into the self. One of the most painful results of projection is the way it entangles relationships. Many romantic relationships begin with idealization, where one partner projects their unlived potential onto the other, seeing them as the embodiment of qualities they have denied in themselves. This can feel intoxicating at first, but it inevitably leads to disillusionment when the other person fails to live up to the projection. Instead of relating to the partner as they truly are, the relationship becomes a struggle between competing projections. Similarly, conflicts often arise when we project our shadow onto others, interpreting their behavior through the lens of our denied qualities. These projections create cycles of hurt, misunderstanding, and dependency. Jung emphasized that true intimacy can only emerge when projections are withdrawn, because only then can we see the other person clearly and relate from authenticity rather than illusion. Detaching from projections transforms relationships by freeing both parties from the burden of carrying each other's unconscious material. Reclaiming projections is a painful but liberating process. It requires looking honestly at the qualities we dislike or admire in others and asking how they might reflect something within ourselves. When someone provokes a strong emotional reaction, positive or negative, it is often a sign that a projection is at work. By pausing and reflecting, we can begin to see what part of us is being mirrored. This recognition can be uncomfortable because it confronts us with aspects of ourselves we would rather deny. Yet it is also the path to freedom, because each projection we reclaim returns energy that was lost to unconsciousness. Instead of scattering our power outward, we gather it back, strengthening our sense of self. Jung believed that projections were not mistakes, but opportunities for growth. They reveal the hidden parts of ourselves, and by reclaiming them, we move closer to wholeness. Detaching from projections also reduces the power others have to hurt us. When we project our worth, strength, or security onto another, we become dependent on them to validate those qualities. Their rejection or failure feels devastating because it seems to strip us of what we believed only they could provide. But when we reclaim those qualities as our own, we are no longer at the mercy of others. We carry our worth within us, our strength within us, our security within us. May still wound us, but the wounds do not cut as deeply because we no longer rely on them to sustain parts of ourselves. This is how detachment from projections builds resilience. It breaks the chains of dependency and restores power to the individual. The process of reclaiming projections is closely tied to shadow integration. The shadow is the source of many projections because it contains everything we refuse to see in ourselves. By confronting the shadow, we naturally begin to withdraw projections. For example, a person who acknowledges their own envy is less likely to see others as constantly competitive or malicious. A person who integrates their own need for love is less likely to become consumed with jealousy in relationships. Each step of shadow work brings back projections that were cast outward, and each reclamation strengthens the self. Jung often said that what we find most irritating or admirable in others tells us more about ourselves than about them. And to detach from projections is to take this insight seriously, using every strong reaction as a clue to our own inner world. The freedom that comes from this work is profound. Without projections, we see others more clearly, and this clarity reduces conflict and disappointment. We no longer burden others with carrying our unlived qualities, and we no longer feel victimized when they fail to meet impossible expectations. This freedom also extends inward because we are no longer divided against ourselves. The qualities once disowned are reintegrated, and this integration makes us stronger, more authentic, and less vulnerable to harm. Life becomes less about battling illusions and more about engaging with reality as it is. This realism is not bleak, but empowering because it allows us to respond to situations with clarity and strength rather than through the distortions of projection. Jung connected this process to the larger task of individuation. Individuation is the journey of becoming whole, and projections are one of the main obstacles on this path. As long as we project, we cannot see ourselves clearly, and we cannot relate authentically to others. By detaching from projections, we take a major step toward individuation, because we reclaim parts of ourselves that had been lost. Each reclaimed projection adds to the richness and depth of the self, making us more resilient and more capable of living authentically. This is why Jung considered projection both a danger and a gift. It is dangerous because it distorts our lives, but it is a gift because it points to what we need to integrate. Every projection is an invitation to wholeness. This process also connects us to archetypal patterns. The tendency to project is universal, a reflection of the archetypal dynamics of the psyche. Stories and myths across cultures depict figures who project their fears onto enemies or their desires onto heroes. By recognizing projection as an archetypal pattern, we see that it is not merely a personal failing, but a human tendency. This recognition helps us approach the process with compassion rather than judgment. It also reminds us that detaching from projections is not about eliminating them completely, but about becoming conscious of them and learning from them. Archetypal figures often grow by recognizing their projections and reclaiming their power. And in doing the same, we participate in this universal journey. The resilience that comes from reclaiming projections is not the resilience of denial or suppression, but the resilience of wholeness. We are no longer fragmented, with parts of ourselves hidden and cast onto others. We are no longer dependent on others to carry our worth, our strength, or our potential. Instead, we hold these qualities within, and this internal anchoring makes us less vulnerable to external shocks. When others criticize us, we can discern whether their words reflect truth or projection, and we can respond with clarity rather than defensiveness. When others disappoint us, we can accept it without despair because we no longer rely on them to complete us. This resilience is quiet but powerful, a strength that cannot be broken because it comes from integration rather than illusion. Ultimately, detaching from projections and reclaiming personal power is about freedom. Projections keep us entangled in illusions, blind to ourselves and dependent on others. Reclaiming them frees us to live authentically, to see clearly, and to stand in our own strength. Jung believed that the path to wholeness was not about escaping pain, but about transforming it. And projection is one of the main ways pain can be transformed. By facing the truth of what we see in others and recognizing it as part of ourselves, we turn wounds into wisdom and dependency into strength. This process requires honesty, courage and humility, but its reward is resilience, the kind of resilience that allows nothing and nobody to truly hurt us at the core, because we are no longer fragmented or dependent. We are whole, and wholeness is the deepest form of protection life can offer. The freedom that comes when the self, not others, defines your worth is one of the most profound realizations in Carl Jung psychology, and it is the culmination of the individuation process. For much of life, individuals live defined by the gaze of others. Parents, teachers, peers, and society at large impose standards of value that shape how we see ourselves. Approval brings a sense of worth, while criticism or rejection brings shame. This dependency creates a fragile identity, one that rises and falls with the opinions of others. Jung believed that true psychological growth required breaking free from this dependency and discovering worth in the self, the archetypal center of wholeness that unites both the conscious and unconscious. When a person's worth is rooted in the self, they gain a freedom that external forces cannot shake, because their identity is no longer tied to fleeting opinions or cultural trends, but to the eternal ground of their own being. The self is not the ego, though essential, is the conscious identity shaped largely by social adaptation. It wants to be seen, to be recognized, to feel secure in its place within the community. But the self is deeper, an inner center that holds the totality of the psyche, both known and unknown. When worth is defined by the ego, it remains fragile, because the ego is always comparing itself, always seeking validation, and always fearing rejection. When worth is defined by the self, it becomes stable, because the self is not dependent on external approval. It is grounded in wholeness, in the integration of light and shadow, in the acceptance of both strengths and weaknesses. To live from the self is to know that your value does not increase with praise or diminish with criticism. It is intrinsic, unchanging, and rooted in the reality of your being. Jung taught that much of human suffering comes from over-identification with the persona, the mask we present to the world. The persona is shaped by cultural expectations and social roles. It is useful for functioning in society, but when we mistake it for the whole self, we become enslaved to external validation. Our worth rises or falls with the success of the persona. If the persona is admired, we feel valuable. If is criticized or ignored, we feel worthless. This dependency creates constant anxiety and leaves us vulnerable to hurt. Individuation requires moving beyond the persona, recognizing it as a mask rather than the essence of identity. When we detach our worth from the persona and root it instead in the self, we are freed from the tyranny of others' judgments. We can still use the persona when needed, but it no longer defines us. This freedom also involves reclaiming projections. When we project our worth onto others, onto authority figures, partners, or institutions, we give them the power to define us. Their approval becomes our lifeline, and their rejection becomes devastation. Jung emphasized the importance of withdrawing projections, because only then can we reclaim our own power. By seeing that the qualities we admire or long for in others actually exist within ourselves, we stop depending on others to validate them. This reclaiming shifts the center of worth back to the self. For example, Someone who constantly seeks validation from a partner may realize through inner work that what they admire in the partner is actually a reflection of their own potential. By integrating this recognition, they no longer feel broken when the partner withdraws approval. Their worth is secure because it is recognized as their own. Rooting worth in the self also changes the way we experience pain. When worth depends on others, pain from rejection or betrayal strikes at the core of identity. It feels as if one's very being is diminished by the actions of others. But when worth comes from the self, pain can still be felt, but it does not define us. Rejection hurts, but it no longer erases our sense of value. Betrayal wounds, but it does not destroy our identity. This distinction is crucial for resilience. Pain becomes an experience to process rather than a judgment on our existence. The self provides an anchor that holds firm even in the storms of life. Jung described this as discovering the inner center, the axis around which the psyche turns. When this axis is strong, the individual can endure external upheavals without collapsing. This freedom also allows for authenticity. When worth depends on others, we constantly adjust ourselves to meet their expectations, silencing parts of who we are in order to be accepted. This self-censorship creates inner conflict and weakens resilience because we are living inauthentically. When worth comes from the self, we no longer need to distort ourselves to gain approval. We can live authentically, expressing our true thoughts, emotions, and desires even if others disapprove. This authenticity creates a sense of inner peace because we are no longer divided against ourselves. We no longer betray our own truth for the sake of external validation. This alignment with authenticity is itself a form of resilience because it allows us to stand firmly in who we are, regardless of external reactions. The archetypal dimension of the self also contributes to this freedom. Jung believed that the self was not only a psychological center, but also a symbol of the divine within the human psyche. It connects us to the collective unconscious and to the larger patterns of life. When worth is rooted in the self, it is not just personal, but transcendent. We feel connected to something greater than ourselves, whether that is expressed in spiritual terms, in nature, or in the symbolic language of dreams and archetypes. This connection imbues life with meaning, and meaning provides resilience. When life has meaning, we can endure hardship without losing our sense of worth. We recognize that our existence is valuable not because others say so, but because we are part of a larger order of being. This recognition provides a strength that no human judgment can take away. The freedom that arises from the self also changes our relationship with power. When worth is defined by others, we often seek power externally through status, wealth, or control in an attempt to secure validation. This pursuit is exhausting and never truly satisfying because external power can be lost at any moment. When worth comes from the self, true power is recognized as inner authority. It is the quiet confidence that arises from being aligned with one's own center. This power does not depend on dominance or recognition. It radiates naturally from authenticity and wholeness. Others may sense it not because of what is said or done, but because of the presence it creates. This kind of power is unshakable because it is not granted by others and therefore cannot be taken away. Living from the self also reduces fear. Much of human fear arises from the possibility of losing worth in the eyes of others. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of judgment. All of these are rooted in the belief that worth depends on external approval. When worth is rooted in the self, these fears diminish. Failure becomes a learning experience rather than a verdict on identity. Rejection becomes an event rather than a definition. Judgment becomes information rather than condemnation. This freedom from fear is one of the deepest forms of resilience because it allows us to act boldly, to take risks, and to live fully without being paralyzed by the opinions of others. Another dimension of this freedom is the ability to love without dependency. When worth is defined by others, relationships become entangled with neediness and fear. We look to others to complete us, to provide the worth we cannot find in ourselves. This creates dependency and sets us up for repeated hurt. When worth comes from the self, relationships become expressions of love rather than transactions of need. We no longer demand that others carry our worth. We share from a place of wholeness. This makes love freer, deeper, and less fragile. We can love without fear of annihilation because our worth is not at stake. Even if relationships change or end, the core of who we are remains intact. This is the kind of love that arises from freedom, and it is only possible when worth is defined by the self. The process of rooting worth in the self requires silence and self-reflection. Jung emphasized that the unconscious speaks in symbols, dreams, and subtle intuitions. To hear this voice, we must withdraw from the noise of external expectations and listen inwardly. In this silence, we begin to sense the self as a guiding presence, an inner compass that points us toward wholeness. The more we listen, the more we realize that our worth has always been present, waiting to be recognized. This recognition is not a sudden revelation, but a gradual unfolding, a process of aligning the ego with the self. Each step in this alignment builds resilience because each step reduces dependency on others and increases trust in the inner center. Ultimately, the freedom that comes when the self defines worth is the freedom to live fully and authentically without fear of being diminished by others. It is the freedom to embrace both strengths and weaknesses, both successes and failures, without losing sight of intrinsic value. It is the freedom to engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than need, to love without fear, and to act without the constant burden of external judgment. This freedom does not make us invulnerable to pain, but it makes us unbreakable at the core, because nothing and nobody can touch the worth that is rooted in the self. This is the strength Jung believed was possible for every individual who undertakes the journey of individuation. And it is the strength that allows life to unfold with authenticity, meaning, and resilience.